This is what happens when a boardroom builds a car. This is the 2-generation-old version of the Ford Explorer. It's exciting news inside of the automotive world this week because they've released the new 2025 Ford Explorer, and I'm happy to announce that it's not anything like this car, but I did think it was a great opportunity to point out the mistake that Ford made all the way back in 2015 when they built this vehicle. You see, this vehicle was built at a time when Ford really wasn't paying attention to their customer base and listening to their audience. You see, the last 3 generations of Ford Explorer were extremely popular because they were a truck-based mid-size SUV that could tow and haul people and typically came with powerful V6s or in some cases powerful V8s. And this was a large departure from that. And that's why this was one of the biggest failures in automotive history. You see, like I mentioned in the intro, all of the Explorers before this one were built on a truck chassis. They typically shared a modified version of the Ranger chassis, and some of them came with powerful V8 motors. In fact, the generation before this was the most popular Ford Explorer ever built, and it had 3 rows of seats, 4-wheel drive, a really great Eddie Bauer luxury edition, and it sold like hotcakes. And when Ford went to the drawing board for their new Explorer, when they came out with this model year, they basically decided as a boardroom that they needed to do what everybody else was doing. And unfortunately, it led to them building a vehicle that nobody was truthfully excited for. And it's unfortunate because the Explorer had so much potential at this time frame. You see, the Ford Explorer, like I said, was a hot vehicle. It sold like crazy. People were extraordinarily excited to go get one because it wasn't like everything else on the shelf. But then Ford, when they designed this, looked at the market and looked at these front-wheel drive V6 Japanese SUVs and said, we need to be like them. And unfortunately, that's where Ford was wrong. You see, their competition wasn't selling because they were like the Ford Explorer. The Ford Explorer was selling great because it wasn't like its competition. It was one of the last few vehicles left around that you could still get. You see, the Blazer and the Ram Charger were all vehicles that were big body-on-frame SUVs that people loved, and they sold because of that reason. And so when Ford turned the Explorer, that people knew as a big body-on-frame SUV, into a unibody front-wheel drive SUV, well, it lost all of its appeal. It lost what made it special, what made it truly different. And that's what's exciting because Ford has learned their lesson with this exact vehicle, but a lot of people don't really pay attention to it because at the end of the day, this is a commuter car. This is a 3-row SUV that most people just bought because they got a good deal, because they're loyal to Ford, because they use a Ford dealership. And so they went and bought one of these. And yes, for years it drove kids to school and did an amazing job getting people where they needed to go, but this was not the Explorers of yore. You see, people, as soon as they started driving this around, and even the journalists when this vehicle came out said, this is a radical departure from what the Ford Explorer is known for. And I don't disagree one bit. But let's talk about, as we go through this vehicle, exactly what makes it different and why it's not as good as the old Explorers, and even the newest generation of Explorer. Well, truthfully, the question has to be asked now, was it beneficial for Ford to switch this vehicle to a unibody chassis? And just so that you guys as a viewer can understand, unibody chassis have a lot of benefits. The biggest one being weight and fuel economy. You see, because these are lighter and able to be more aerodynamic, these vehicles get a lot better fuel economy, which during the time that Ford was developing this vehicle was a big deal. You see, the old Explorer had that big V8 like we talked about, and it got a terrible, abysmal 15 to 18 miles to the gallon, which I'm sorry, in that time frame when you had vehicles like the Toyota Highlander being in the mid-20s was just not competitive. But having this unibody did open us up to some amazing cargo features back here in the rear. See, this vehicle here has a trick rear third row, so this all folds in a very unique way. It folds flat, and then it actually does this cool pivot here where it flips like that. And this allowed the seats to store more similarly to a minivan than an SUV, especially when you compare it to the old one. And now you have a nice big spacious cargo area in just a few seconds, as opposed to having this big, huge, large bench mounted above the floor. On top of that, it gave us the ability to store the spare tire underneath. And back here we've got USB ports, windows, cup holders, amenities that the Explorer hadn't seen before this generation. And so it was definitely beneficial for them to move to this unibody chassis, at least from an interior perspective. And you can see how easily these seats are to maneuver up and down. Just like that, the headrest popped back up. Oh, we almost got it. There we go. So there you go. we're back to a 7-seater SUV, and because of this nice big divot, we can store the spare tire. When I said the spare tire can go underneath, I mainly meant the spare tire can go inside, because once this cover is moved out of the way, we actually have a full-size spare inside the vehicle, which is really nice because you don't have to worry about it being exposed to the elements or dry rotting or anything like that. And so as far as the unibody chassis goes, you can definitely see on paper how it made a difference for Ford and how overall it made it better, at least on paper. Well, I'm sure all of you that are car nerds just like me have already noticed that, well, of course, it's a unibody. You get more interior space. It's built like a car. It's going to ride a little bit better and get better fuel economy and be lighter. But those aren't necessarily benefits depending on the use case. For example, towing went down in the Ford Explorer when it came to this generation. And more specifically, rear handling went down because this vehicle went from a rear-wheel drive truck-based chassis to a front-wheel drive chassis. The vehicle handled completely different. And one of the biggest people that the Ford was marketing this vehicle to was the police, because you see in 2011, they got rid of the Crown Victoria, which was their #1 selling fleet vehicle inside of the Ford Motor Company, excluding the large F-250s, 350s, and 550s, which are known as the Super Duty. But this vehicle was marketed to the police as the Police Interceptor. And the police bought it to appease Ford, but they didn't really like it. You see, during this time frame, a lot of police units moved to Chevy Tahoes and even Dodge Chargers and Dodge Durangos because those were rear-wheel drive chassis that handled a lot better. But the good news is Ford redeemed themselves, because the generation after this vehicle and the new one that just came out in 2025 is a rear-wheel bias unit. It is rear-wheel drive standard and then all-wheel drive as an option. And so towing is back to being good. Towing is now 5,000 pounds on the newest one, and that is plenty of towing and hauling. You see, if you get this vehicle as a front-wheel drive unibody vehicle, you have a max tow, at least according to Ford's ratings, of 3,500 pounds. And I'm sorry, going from over 6,000 pounds down to 3,500 pounds in one generation, especially if you're a consumer who loved to tow with your old Explorer, just wasn't enough. One of the other more unfortunate things about this generation of Explorer that doesn't affect nearly as many people was the absence of the Explorer Sport Track. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, that is a little 4-door mid-sized truck that Ford was building during that time frame. It came with a 4-liter V6 and a rear seat and a nice little stubby 4.5-foot bed, and it came with 4-wheel drive. It was very cool. See, when they came out with this Explorer, they actually got rid of that along with the Ford Ranger. So now at this time frame, especially when this vehicle came out, there was no mid-sized truck, especially not one with a rear seat. And so those who loved the Explorer Sport Track, and specifically that kind of 4-door Ranger-ish thing that was going on with it, couldn't get it anymore. Now we're inside the Ford Explorer, and I don't want to spend too much time in here because, quite frankly, this generation was nothing but improvements when it came to interior. You had more interior volume, you had a lower step-in height, you had more space for people, you had more latch points for car seats. But I do want to focus on this one point, and this is that when you went from that unibody chassis to a frame, you lowered your seat height, making this vehicle, for some people, feel less safe. Not that it actually was, because this unibody chassis actually designs more crumple zones and safety features into it than that old body on frame chassis did. But overall, I think the interior was pretty much a win because the space in here is a lot better. In fact, I have had customers complain who had this generation and went to the newest generation who say, I actually lost a little bit of cargo space up in the front seats. But I think overall, the interior was kind of a win on this generation. So now here we are underneath the hood of this generation Ford Explorer, and this is the more basic naturally aspirated V6, but in the sport trim levels, they actually did a really good job by offering the twin-turbo V6 found in the F-150, at least a modified version of it to make it fit, and it made a ton of horsepower, and it was available with a great all-wheel drive system, and people loved that powertrain. In fact, people loved that specific trim level because it offered luxury features like heated and cooled seats, a 400 horsepower motor, and a 5,000-pound towing capacity, which was something that this Ford Explorer was really lacking up until that trim level was released. And so I'd say in the powertrain department, Ford did overall a very good job on this generation vehicle. They didn't put an underpowered little 4-cylinder in here without a turbo. They gave a naturally aspirated V6 standard and then a bigger turbo V6 available. And in the newest generation, there's now an ST version, which makes over 400 horsepower, puts it down to all 4 wheels, like I said, is rear biased, and really just takes off. It's a great overall trim level and powertrain. So what do you guys think overall of this generation Ford Explorer? Do you think it was a major failure? Do you think that Ford did the necessary changes that needed to be done from a design and engineering standpoint? And do you guys think that I did a good presentation of this vehicle? If you do, make sure to like on the video. And if you're enjoying the channel, make sure to subscribe. Of course, hit that notifications bell. and of course, leave comments and let me know what you want to see on the channel next. I look really forward to hearing from you guys, and I'm excited to continue to build up this channel and let you guys have more interesting videos like this, because of course new cars are awesome and they're fun and everybody wants the newest and latest and greatest, but sometimes it's great to go back in the past and see exactly a great story like this on what happened. And if you guys are interested in this particular Explorer, it is for sale here at my dealership, Terrebonne Ford. And of course, you can check out my information down in the description and get a hold of me if you'd like. But overall, like I said, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you guys think? Did you like this generation Explorer better than the previous ones? Did you guys hate this Explorer when it came out? And have you come around to it now that it's been out quite a few years? Is it something that you guys would personally go out and buy? Let me know. Thanks for watching, guys, and have an amazing day.